Galactic Council, baffled by human ability to thrive in any gravity. Something is wrong with the humans. The alarm did not give anyone a warning, it simply screamed. At 3:47 station time, Velkara Orbital Research Station lurched as its gravity field spiked from 2.4 standard units to 3.6 in under 4 seconds. Every non-human crew member on the main deck hit the floor without ceremony. Bones were not built for this. Muscles had never been trained for this. 17 alien researchers from 3 different species went down like cut strings, pinned flat by a force their bodies had no answer for. Station Chief Goran, senior Vrethian administrator and 20-year veteran of deep space research operations, found himself pressed against his console with his ribcage compressing around every breath. His vision blurred at the edges. He tried to call out to his crew. His voice came out as barely a whisper. Through narrowed eyes, through the spots that were starting to appear at the corners of his sight, he watched the monitoring feeds. And then he saw them. The humans were still standing. Commander Owen Clark was at the far end of the main corridor, both hands locked onto a heavy equipment crate that the surge had sent sliding toward the ventilation grate. His jaw was tight. His boots were planted wide on the floor. His arms were working. He shoved the crate back, locked it into place with a clamp he pulled from his belt, and turned around to look at the downed Vrethian researchers with an expression that was calm and focused and entirely unbothered by the fact that the room weighed nearly half again more than it should. He walked toward them, not slowly, not with visible effort. He walked the way a person walks when they have somewhere to be. Goran could not raise his own arm above his shoulder. Owen Clark was walking. "Stay down," Owen said to the researchers, crouching beside the nearest one and checking her pulse at the neck with practiced fingers. "The system will normalize. Try to breathe from your lower chest." His voice was even. His hands were steady. He checked the next researcher, then the next, then stood and moved to the monitoring panel on the wall, reading the field output readings with one hand while his other rested on the shoulder of a young Grevari technician who was trying and failing to pull himself upright. "Stay," Owen said to the technician, not unkindly. "You will hurt yourself." Down the corridor, something was happening that Goran would struggle, in the days that followed, to describe in scientific language. Engineer Cole Ward was on his back beneath an open hull panel in the secondary maintenance passage. He had opened that panel before the surge. He had been working on a vibrating connector joint that had been flagging minor alerts for 2 days, a job that kept getting pushed back because there was always something more urgent. The surge had arrived while he was halfway through the job. He had decided the surge was not a reason to stop. Goran could hear the steady, rhythmic sound of Cole's wrench turning. He could hear Cole humming something under his breath, a melody with no particular urgency to it, the kind of sound a person makes when they are doing familiar work and their mind is pleasantly occupied. "Cole," Owen called from the corridor. "Almost done," Cole said from inside the wall. A pause, the sound of a tool clicking firmly into place, then Cole's voice again, satisfied and quiet. "There. That connector has been driving me crazy for a week." The surge lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. When it ended and the field dropped back to 2.4 standard units, the non-human crew began the slow process of getting off the floor. It was not a quick process. Several researchers needed help standing. 3 had minor injuries from the impact of going down. The station's medical alert system was chiming in 4 different compartments. Medical Officer Nina Ford was already moving through the corridor before most of the Vrethian crew had fully recovered. She had come out of the secondary lab where she had been working during the surge, and she had come out walking, not stumbling, not pressing herself against walls for support. She moved from person to person with the brisk, unhurried efficiency of someone who has a job to do and knows exactly how to do it, a scanner in one hand. A question already forming for each patient before she reached them. "How is your head? Any ringing? Can you follow my finger?" She did not look strained. She did not look like someone who had just spent 4 minutes being crushed by a gravity field far beyond what her species was supposed to be able to tolerate. She looked like someone who was 40 minutes into a morning shift and had plenty of fuel left. Goran pulled himself upright against his console and held on. His legs were shaking. He watched Nina crouch beside a downed Grivari researcher and begin a thorough assessment, and he thought about the 11 days the human crew had been on the station. 11 days of politely declining the low-gravity safety modules. 11 days of working full rotations in the main corridors, while his own crew rotated out every 6 hours for mandatory rest. 11 days of Cole Ward and Owen Clark and Nina Ford, and xenolinguist Kate Arden moving through Velkara Station's high-gravity zones, as though the crushing weight pressing down on everything else was simply not a matter worth discussing. He had offered them the safety modules 3 times. Owen had declined each time with a small shake of his head, and a genuine-sounding thank you that somehow made it impossible to push the issue further. Goran had told himself the humans simply did not understand the risk. He understood now that the humans understood the risk perfectly. They were not ignoring it. They were not pretending. They had assessed it, measured it against their own capacity, and found it manageable. That was all. That was the entire explanation. It did not make him feel better. He found Kate Arden in the secondary lab doorway, where she had appeared sometime in the last few minutes, holding 2 cups of something warm from the station's food processor. She was looking at the corridor scene with a calm that matched her colleagues exactly, and when the nearest Vrethian researcher, still sitting on the floor and looking pale, met her eyes, Kate crossed to her and sat down on the floor beside her, cross-legged, and offered her one of the cups. "You okay?" Kate asked. The researcher did not answer. Kate nodded and waited, holding the cup steady. Goran went to his private terminal. His hands were still trembling slightly, though he had no intention of nodding that in any document. He opened a new incident file. He classified it as Priority 1. He began to type. He wrote about the gravity surge. He wrote about the field spike to 3.6 standard units. He wrote about the duration, the cause as identified by the station's automated sensors, the extent of crew injuries sustained during the event. He wrote about the evacuation procedures followed by his non-human crew and noted that those procedures had been executed correctly given the speed of the event. Then he wrote about the humans. He tried to do this accurately, in the flat and neutral language that incident reports required. He wrote that the human team had remained mobile and functional throughout the full duration of the surge event. He wrote that engineering specialist Cole Ward had continued and completed a maintenance procedure during the event without interruption. He wrote that Commander Clark had secured loose equipment and conducted primary medical assessments on downed crew while the event was still active. He wrote that Medical Officer Ford had begun full triage of injured personnel before the field had fully normalized. He stopped, reread what he had written. He added one more line, and it was not in the neutral language of incident reports. It was in the plain language of a person who had run out of official vocabulary for what he had seen. This station is unable to explain the observed human behavior through any standard biological framework currently available to this unit. Escalation to the Galactic Council Science Division is strongly recommended. He assigned it the highest possible flag designation, Tier 1 Biological Anomaly. In 34 years of service, he had never used that flag. He had not expected to ever use it for something that was not an outbreak or a structural catastrophe. He sent the report. Down in the main corridor, Owen had come back from settling the last of the injured Vrethian researchers in the medical bay. He stopped at the wall display near the corridor junction and checked the outgoing transmission log out of habit, the way commanders do. He saw the flag designation on Goran's report. He read the classification. His expression did not change in any particular way, but he stood there for a few extra seconds. Cole appeared beside him, tool kit repacked and hanging from his shoulder, the connector job finished. Tier 1, Cole said, reading the display. Tier 1, Owen said. Cole thought about this, because of the surge. Because of us, Owen said. A pause settled between them, easy and without weight. Cole said. Yeah, Owen said. They stood there together a moment longer, looking at nothing in particular. Then Owen pushed off from the wall and headed back to the control deck. There was still 6 hours left in the rotation, and a 3.6 unit gravity surge was not a reason to fall behind on the work schedule. Across the galaxy, on 17 council desks, a notification landed quietly in the incoming file queue. None of those 17 desks had ever received a Tier 1 biological anomaly flag before. Every single one of them opened it within the hour. The Council convenes. The Galactic Council chambers on Ethon Prime smelled like cool stone and filtered air. The gravity here was a precise and comfortable 0.74 standard units, light enough that most delegates arrived at sessions with their joints feeling loose and their breathing feeling easy. A subtle but genuine physical relief that had made Ethon Prime the preferred location for council proceedings for 200 years. Every species that sat in these chambers felt slightly better here than they did at home. It was, by design, a place where everyone could think clearly. Dr. Lena Graves sat at the human delegation table, her documents in order, and waited. She had read Goran's incident report twice on the transit flight from the Ardent. She had also read the 37 follow-up documents that various council science officials had attached to it over the 6 days since its submission. Some of those documents were long. Some of them used terminology that Lena, despite 2 doctorates and 15 years working in xenobiology and interspecies relations, had looked up twice. They were written by very intelligent people who were clearly struggling with what they had seen. The short version of all 37 documents could be summed up in 4 words: we cannot explain this. The chamber filled over the following 30 minutes. Delegates from 12 species took their assigned seats. Advisors, researchers, and scientific attachés arranged themselves on the tiered benches behind the main delegate positions. The Vrethian block arrived as a group, Goran among them, stepping carefully in the low gravity that his body found almost disorienting after years at Velkara. He found Lena's eyes across the chamber when he sat down. She gave him a small, measured nod. He looked away first. Council Chair Venra opened the session at the scheduled time. The purpose of this session, Venra said, is to review the biological incident filed from Velkara Station 11 days ago and to seek from the human delegation a clear account of the events described therein. The Council thanks the human delegation for responding promptly to this summons. Lena inclined her head. The Council's primary line of inquiry, Venra continued, concerns the possibility that the human crew members at Velkara were in possession of undisclosed technological assistance during the gravity surge event. Specifically, there is a formal motion before this body that human work and EVA suits may contain gravitational dampening technology, not included in the equipment manifest submitted at the start of the joint research rotation. This would constitute a breach of Joint Operations Protocol. The room settled. Every eye in the chamber, alien as they all were, had a quality of focused attention that was universal. Lena had expected this theory. She had predicted it to Owen over a comm connection 3 days ago, and Owen had laughed so suddenly that he spilled his coffee, which she had also not told the Council. Delegate Parrott of the Grevari block rose from his seat. He was a careful, formal man with a structured way of speaking that suggested he had prepared everything he intended to say at least 24 hours in advance. The Grevari delegation formally requests, Parrott said, that all personal equipment worn or carried by the human crew during the Velkara rotation be surrendered immediately for full technical examination by the Council's Science Division. We have specific concerns regarding the structural composition of the inner suit linings, the boot sole architecture, and any embedded systems in the crew's standard-issue wrist panels. The human delegation has no objection, Lena said. This was clearly not what Parrott had prepared for. He paused mid-breath, reformatted his response, and continued. We would also request access to any personal medical devices carried by the crew during the rotation. Also no objection, Lena said. However, in the interest of saving this council a considerable amount of time, I would like to offer an alternative, a physical demonstration. If the council is willing to observe it, I believe it will answer the technology question more directly and efficiently than a technical examination. Venra looked at her with the guarded curiosity of someone who has seen many things in a long career and was not sure what category this would fall into. What kind of demonstration? Lena stood up from her chair. She removed her jacket. She laid it flat on the table, smoothed it once, and stepped around to the open floor space in front of the delegation table. She was wearing a plain, long-sleeved shirt underneath. No panels, no embedded framework, no wiring of any kind. The kind of shirt available in any market on any human station or colony for approximately 4 credits. I would like to note for the record, she said, addressing the full chamber, that we are currently at 0.74 standard gravity units. Earth standard surface gravity is 1 units. I am, at this moment, standing in a room that is measurably lighter than the world I was born on. She dropped to the floor and completed 40 push-ups. She did not rush them. She kept a clean, even pace, the kind that suggests a person who has done this enough times that they are no longer counting. She stood back up without pausing. The chamber was absolutely still. If my clothing contained gravitational dampening technology, she said, walking back to the table, I would have left it with my jacket. I did not, because there is nothing to leave. She picked up her jacket and put it back on. What you saw Cole Ward and Commander Clark do at Velcara Station, they did with nothing but their bodies. The same bodies every human being has had for approximately 200,000 years. The silence stretched. Someone in the Kethali section shifted in their seat, and the small sound was audible across the entire chamber. Delegate Parrott opened his mouth. He closed it. He seemed to be reorganizing a great deal of prepared material and finding that none of it quite applied anymore. One of the Thune delegates, a soft-featured observer named Rao who had been assigned to watch the session and file notes, was writing very quickly in his personal log. He had been writing continuously since Lena removed her jacket. The Grevari delegation, Parrott said eventually, in a quieter voice than before, requests permission to conduct a full biological examination of a human volunteer. We want to understand the physiological basis for the observations reported at Velcara, a complete physical assessment, bone density, muscular mapping, neurological response, metabolic profiling. Lena looked down the table to her left. Medical Officer Nina Ford was sitting 2 seats away, in her standard crew uniform, with the patient expression of someone who had been expecting this exact request for several days and had already decided her answer. Dr. Ford, Lena said. Ready, Nina said. The examination took place in the Council Medical Facility on the lower level of the complex. The lead physician was Oler, a Grevari comparative biologist who had spent 60 years studying sapient life in all its documented forms, had written the Council's standard reference text on organic resilience thresholds, and was widely considered the finest working xenobiologist in the known galactic community. He began the examination at the 3rd hour of the session. He finished 5 hours and 12 minutes later. In those 5 hours, Oler conducted bone density scans, detailed muscle fiber mapping, cardiovascular stress profiling, respiratory efficiency testing, neurological response measurement across 17 separate stimuli, full metabolic rate analysis, and an extended assessment on the Council's precision resistance measurement platform. which was designed to find the upper limit of a subject's physical output, and had successfully found that upper limit for every sapient species previously tested. When Oler instructed Nina to engage with the resistance platform at full exertion, she worked through the complete protocol at an output level that maxed the device's upper scale. When she finished, she looked at the readout and asked if there was a harder setting. Oler checked. There was not. The device had been built to accommodate every known sapient species at their peak performance. It had never run out of room before. He made a note of this in the careful, even handwriting he used when the situation was too significant for shortcuts. Nina, for her part, was pleasant throughout the entire examination. She answered every question directly and honestly. She completed every physical test without complaint. When Oler explained what a particular measurement device was testing, she asked intelligent follow-up questions that suggested she was genuinely interested in the methodology. At one point, during a rest interval between two of the more demanding tests, she offered to share the snack she had brought in her pocket. Oler declined, but he found the offer oddly humanizing in a way that he noted privately and did not include in his formal report. When the examination concluded, Oler dismissed his junior physicians and research aides and sat alone in the analysis room for 19 minutes. His tablet was on the desk in front of him. The data was compiled and clear. The numbers said what they said. He read them twice more, not because he doubted them, but because he was the kind of person who believed that facts of this magnitude deserved to be read carefully before they were presented to anyone. Then he called his team back in and told them to begin preparing the formal report. He went back into the main examination room. Nina was sitting on the edge of the table, reading something on her personal device and eating the snack from her pocket. "Dr. Ford," he said. "Yes," she said. "Is this level of physical conditioning typical for humans, or are you specifically selected for high-performance deployment?" Nina thought about this with the honest attention of someone who took medical questions seriously. "Pretty typical," she said. "I keep up with my training, but I'm nothing special. There are people back home who would find those resistance tests genuinely easy. I have a friend who runs 50 kilometers every weekend as a hobby. And my older brother, who has never once voluntarily gone to a gym in his life, once carried a full-size refrigerator up 3 flights of stairs by himself because the delivery people didn't show up." Oler looked at her steadily. "He complained about his back for a week," Nina added, "but he did it." Oler returned to his analysis room. Upstairs, the main chamber had moved into a waiting recess. Lena sat at the delegation table with a cup of tea and checked her messages. One was from Owen, sent from the Ardent. "What did they find?" it said. She typed back, "Apparently us." A pause, then, "Tell them we come in peace." She looked at the message for a moment. She did not quite smile, but it was close. The technology theory was gone from the chamber by the time the delegates reconvened. Nobody raised it again. The conversation had shifted entirely. It was quieter now and more careful, the way conversations become when the thing being discussed is too large for quick language. Parrott's formal manner had softened slightly. He was asking questions rather than making motions. Other delegates were talking in the measured tones of people who are rearranging significant assumptions. At the edge of the Vrethian bench, the young researcher Tev, who had been at Velkara Station during the surge and had watched the footage 50 times since, was sitting very still and thinking about something Lena had said earlier. He had written it down in his personal notes. "We rest when we decide to, not when the environment tells us to." He was still thinking about the difference when the session was adjourned. Let them go somewhere worse. The formal invitation to Gorath IV arrived on the Ardent's comm system on a Tuesday, mid-morning, when Owen was in the corridor with a cup of coffee and nothing pressing for the next 4 minutes. The message was long. It was written in the careful, layered language of council diplomatic correspondence, full of phrases like Joint Scientific Survey Initiative and Collaborative Geological Assessment Program and mutual benefit to all participating parties. It mentioned mineral sampling, atmospheric data collection, and surface composition analysis as the primary objectives of the proposed mission. It included a detailed breakdown of expected deliverables and a suggested timeline for report submission following the survey. Owen read all of it. He was a thorough reader. Then he scrolled to the mission parameters section at the bottom of the document and found the environmental index listing for Gorath IV. Surface gravity, 4.1 standard units. He called Cole on the ship's internal comm. Gorath IV, Owen said. The mining world, Cole said. There was the background sound of him working on something. They want a surface survey team. How deep is the gravity? 4.1. A pause, a tool clicked against something metal. Do we get lunch out of it? Owen sent his acceptance to the council liaison within the hour. In the message, he confirmed the four-person team composition and politely asked whether meal provisions would be available on site or whether the team should bring their own supplies. The liaison replied that no meal provisions would be available on Gorath IV's surface. They brought their own. The observation team that would be accompanying the mission consisted of 9 individuals from the Vrethian and Grevari delegations. Tev was there. Oler was there, with his tablet and his careful handwriting and the expression of someone who had already decided to observe everything very closely. The team had been given the formal title of Scientific Monitoring Unit. Their role, as outlined in the mission brief, was to document the survey process and collect data on the environmental conditions encountered. Nobody in the observation unit descended to the surface. This was framed in the mission plan as a phased deployment approach, with the human team conducting the initial assessment pass before the full unit came down. The phased period was scheduled for 3 hours. Everyone understood that the observation unit was not planning to descend at all. At 4.1 standard gravity units, Gorath IV's surface was a place where the rocks themselves seemed to press down harder than rocks should. The terrain was flat and vast, broken by long dark ridgelines of compressed stone pushed up over millions of years by the planet's immense internal forces. The sky was a deep orange-brown. The air was thin enough to require EVA suits. The temperature was cold but within tolerances. The gravity was not. Owen described it in his mission log later as wearing a suit made of wet concrete. He wrote this not as a complaint but as a descriptive note, the same way he might note that a particular moon had blue soil or that the wind on a certain planet carried a metallic smell. He wrote it down and moved on to the next line, which was about the survey grid coordinates. Cole unpacked the drone array from the equipment cases and began assembly. Nina ran an atmospheric sampling sequence. Kate Arden, whose title was Xenolinguist but who had argued her way onto the mission on the grounds that something extraordinary is happening and I refuse to miss it, was already walking toward the eastern ridgeline with her geological sensor out. Kate, Owen said. I'm working, she said, without turning around. In the lander, 300 meters back on the flat ground, the observation team watched through the exterior hull cameras in a silence that had started out professional and was becoming something more complicated with every passing minute. Oler had his tablet ready. He was watching Owen move across the first survey grid section, placing signal markers at the designated coordinate points. Owen's stride was shorter than usual, his posture angled slightly forward, his weight distributed across the full foot with every step. He was adapting in real time, Oler noted, making the small continuous adjustments that high-gravity movement required. But he was moving, consistently. Without the visible effort that 4.1 G should have demanded from any biological creature of his size. Oler had worked in 4.1 G once before, years ago, in a full mechanical exoframe with reinforced joint support and pneumatic assistance. He had lasted 38 minutes before requesting extraction. He had not been able to raise his arms fully for 2 days afterward. Owen Clark was placing metal survey markers into compressed stone ground with his bare hands. At the 35-minute mark, Cole finished assembling the drone array and began the calibration sequence. The high gravity was throwing off the launch angle projection significantly, and each recalibration required him to kneel at ground level and make manual adjustments to the trajectory software. He did this 3 times, each time kneeling, adjusting, standing, testing the output data, then kneeling again. He did not rush. He did not appear frustrated. He worked through it with the patient efficiency of someone who has encountered obstacles in their work many times and has long since decided that obstacles are just part of the process. When the drones finally lifted and began their survey sweep, Cole sat back on his heels and watched them go for about 15 seconds, confirming their pattern was correct. Then he stood, dusted off his knees, and told Owen the drone array was running clean. Tev was watching Cole from the camera feed. He had watched the entire calibration process without speaking. He was thinking about the 3 separate times Cole had gone all the way to the ground and back up, in 4.1 G, without any visible acknowledgement that this was difficult. Not a pause between movements. Not an adjustment to his breathing that showed on the external suit monitors. At the 1-hour mark, Kate and Cole were at the eastern ridgeline. The drone data had flagged a subsurface anomaly 60 meters into the rock formation, and Kate had declared this the most interesting thing she had seen since arriving in the system. She was working her geological sensor across the base of the ridge, while Cole checked the signal drone he had sent into the crevice formation above. Kate started climbing. Not the crevice, the ridge itself. There was a natural stepped formation on the left face that offered footholds, and the top of the ridge gave an elevated angle for the geological sensor that the base simply could not match. She tested each foothold before committing her weight, worked her way up in steady stages, and reached the top in 4 minutes. In the lander, 3 members of the observation team stood up from their seats without realizing they had done it. Kate stood on top of the ridge. She swept her sensor across the face of the formation below her. She looked out at the landscape, the flat orange-brown plain and the distant ridgelines, and the drones running their silent patterns overhead against the deep sky, and she did something that nobody in the lander expected. She took out her personal camera. She took photographs, several of them from different angles, adjusting her position along the top of the ridge to find the best light. She took her time. The photos were clearly important to her. Pale, the junior Grevari researcher sitting beside Oler, said very quietly. She climbed up there to take photographs. Yes, Oler said. For personal reasons. It appears so, Oler said. The lander was quiet for a long moment. At the 90-minute mark, Nina finished her atmospheric assessment, transmitted the compiled data to the lander on the standard feed, packed her sampling equipment, and sat down on a flat section of rock to eat lunch. There was no other way to describe it. She sat on a rock on the surface of a 4.1 G planet, opened her meal container, and ate, comfortably upright, looking around at the landscape with the calm expression of someone whose main thought was whether the meal was going to be filling enough. She pulled a small paper notebook from her kit bag. She opened it and began to write. The observation unit watched a human being eat lunch and take personal notes on the surface of a world where no biological creature had ever voluntarily spent more than 2 hours. The silence in the lander had long since passed the point where anyone felt the need to try to break it. At the 2-hour mark, Owen reached the second survey anchor position. The distance from the first anchor was approximately 70 meters. He looked at his mission timer, checked the coordinate data on his wrist panel, and started moving faster. He jogged. His arms came up. His stride lengthened as much as the gravity would allow. His boots struck the compressed stone ground in a rhythm. He ran 70 meters across a planet that by every established biological model should have made walking a serious physical challenge for his species. He reached the second anchor point. He planted the marker, he made a note, he checked his timer, he kept moving. In the lander, Oler's writing hand had stopped. The stylus was resting on his tablet. He was watching Owen run on the camera feed with the expression of a man who has devoted his life to understanding living things and has just encountered something that sits entirely outside every framework he built that understanding on. Tev was beside him. Tev had not spoken for almost 30 minutes. He was watching the feed with the careful attention of someone who knows they are seeing something they need to understand properly before they try to put words to it. "Do you think they know?" Pale asked. Tev looked at him. "Know what?" "How unusual they are," Pale said. "Do they know that what they are doing is impossible by our standards?" Tev thought about this for a long time. He thought about Lena Graves removing her jacket in the council chamber. He thought about Cole fixing a hull connector during a 3.6G surge because the noise had been bothering him. He thought about Kate climbing a ridge in 4.1G to get a better photograph of the light. "I think they know," Tev said, "and I think they have thought about it and considered it and then moved on. Because there are things to do, and knowing you are unusual does not get those things done." He looked back at the camera feed. Owen was placing the final survey marker. "They are not trying to impress us," Tev said. "That is what I keep coming back to. They are simply doing their work. We are the ones who are impressed." At the 3-hour mark, Owen called the all clear. Survey complete. All data compiled. The drone array was recovered and packed. Cole loaded the equipment cases. Nina closed her notebook and put it away. Kate climbed back down from the ridge without incident. "Surface team returning," Owen said over the comm. "Good data. Cole found a significant mineral seam in the eastern formation that was not in the original scan. Kate has detailed strata notes from the ridge face. Nina is flagging an atmospheric particle anomaly in the southeast quarter for a follow-up study proposal." A pause. "Kate also has photographs from the ridge. She said she will share them if anyone would like to see them." When the team climbed back into the lander, Tev looked at Kate. "Did you climb up there just for the view?" he asked. "The light was doing something I had never seen before," Kate said. "The low-angle sun through the particulate atmosphere. I wanted to document it properly." She turned her camera toward him and showed him one of the photographs on the small screen. "Was it worth it?" "Yes." "Did my legs feel heavy?" "Also yes." "Was I going to let that stop me?" "Clearly not." Tev looked at the photograph. The compressed dark ridge against the orange sky, shot from above, the flat survey plane spread out below with the tiny figures of Owen and Cole visible at the anchor points. It was, genuinely, a beautiful image. He filed the moment in the part of his mind, reserved for things that were going to take a long time to fully understand. The deep file. The document was 72 pages long and had no dramatic title. It was called, simply, Preliminary Xenobiological Profile, Human Species, Earth Origin, Sol System. It had taken 2 weeks to prepare. It had been co-authored by Oler and 6 additional researchers from the Council Science Division, all of them specialists, all of them thorough. Oler submitted it to the science board at 9 in the morning on a quiet day, and then sat at his desk and waited. The first response arrived 40 minutes later. It was from Board Director Vel, who had been running the Council's Science Division for 45 years and had the reputation of a person who was very difficult to surprise. The message was 4 words long. "Come to my office." Vel was standing at his office window when Oler arrived, looking out at the Ethon Prime skyline in the pale morning light. He did not turn around immediately. "I have read your report," Vel said. "I assumed you would," Oler said. "I want to confirm that I am reading it correctly." Vel turned from the window. "You are saying that Earth, the human home world, has a surface gravitational field of 9.8 meters per second squared." That is correct. And that this gravitational field, in combination with a dense reactive oxygen atmosphere, a surface temperature range exceeding 100 degrees of variance within a single planetary year, active tectonic instability producing regular catastrophic geological events, and a documented history of at least 5 separate mass extinction events, creates an environment that, according to the Standard Council biological models, should be, and I am quoting your report directly here, inconsistent with the long-term development of complex sapient life. That is what the standard models predict, Oler said. Yes. And yet, Vel said. And yet, Oler said. Vel moved to his desk and sat down. He picked up the report and held it the way you hold something that has done something to you. Tell me about the evolutionary section, he said. Walk me through it. Humans are descended from prey animals, Oler said. In the early period of their species' existence, they were not the dominant predators of their environment. They were smaller and physically weaker than many of the creatures that shared their world. They were hunted. For millions of years, they occupied a position in their ecosystem that most species would find extremely discouraging. Vel stared at him. They were hunted by creatures significantly larger and faster than themselves, Oler said. They survived this period not through physical dominance but through a combination of endurance, collective cooperation, and the development of tools. Their physiological response to this long period of pressure was to develop traits optimized for sustained output rather than peak explosive performance. Their cardiovascular architecture is built for endurance. They possess a thermoregulation system, specifically an extensive network of sweat glands, that allows them to maintain physical activity in heat conditions that would incapacitate most comparable species. Their bone density is among the highest documented for any sapient species of their body mass. They evolved to run away from things that were trying to catch them, Vel said. Specifically, they evolved to outrun those things over very long distances, Oler said. Their pursuit endurance, their capacity to maintain a chase or a flight over hours, is documented in the report and is, I can say without exaggeration, unlike anything the Council database currently contains. Vel put the report down. He picked it up again. The section on exercise, he said. Yes. They do this voluntarily. Regularly, Oler said. Many humans engage in deliberate physical self-stress every single day. It is a widespread cultural practice. They call it exercise, and they do it for health, for personal achievement, for recreational enjoyment, and in many cases because their bodies have adapted to expect it and feel unwell without it. Vel was very still. They have competitive events, Oler continued, dedicated entirely to measuring and celebrating human physical capacity. These events attract millions of participants and hundreds of millions of observers every year. Some of these events involve running over 40 kilometers in a continuous effort. Some involve swimming across open ocean passages of significant length. The most extreme documented events involve running over 100 kilometers through desert terrain, or climbing mountains at altitudes where oxygen levels are low enough to cause physiological distress in most other sapient species. These events are voluntary, Vel said. Entirely. No compensation is required. In many cases, participants pay significant sums of money in order to be allowed to enter. Oler paused. The cultural framework around these activities treats them not as acts of survival or desperation, but as personal achievements worthy of celebration and respect. The humans who complete extreme endurance events are regarded by their society the way other cultures regard great scientists or artists. Vel put his head in one hand. There is a specific anecdote in the report, Oler said, that I want to highlight because I believe it communicates something important that the data alone does not fully convey. He opened his copy of the report to the relevant page. During a cultural briefing session conducted by our xenolinguist Kate Arden for the Thun Liaison Rao, she described a historical individual named Park Jiang-soo, who, in the early period of human planetary expansion, completed a 42-kilometer endurance race on Mars. Mars being the fourth planet in the Sol system, Vel said. Gravity at 0.38 standard units. Very thin atmosphere requiring supplementary oxygen equipment. Surface temperature ranging from extreme cold to moderate cold depending on local conditions. Not a forgiving environment. And this person chose to hold a race there. A race took place there, yes, Oler said. This individual had registered to participate months in advance. On the day of the race, a significant atmospheric dust storm developed. The storm reduced visibility to near zero and required additional respiratory management from all participants. The race committee offered cancellation as an option. Vel looked at him. Park Jiang-soo completed the race, Oler said. In the storm. His stated reason, as recorded by Kate Arden, was that he had already paid the registration fee and had completed the training program, and he was not going to let a dust storm make that preparation meaningless. Vel did not speak for a very long time. Aboard the Arden, at roughly the same hour that Vel was sitting in silence with a report that had changed his understanding of what a living thing could be, Kate was in the crew lounge across from Rao, who had come for a second cultural briefing session with a fresh notebook and more questions than the first session had generated. Kate liked these sessions. She liked Rao. She liked the way he leaned forward when she talked, the way his writing never stopped during the parts he found most important, the way he asked follow-up questions that showed he had genuinely processed what she said rather than simply waited for her to finish speaking. She talked about the mountains. She talked about the tradition, centuries old and still very much alive, of climbing Earth's highest peaks, not for any material benefit, not as a strategic objective, for the experience of having stood at the highest point available and seen what could be seen from there, for the difficulty of getting there, for the earned quality of the view. They climb knowing it is difficult, Rao said. They climb because it is difficult, Kate said. The difficulty is the point. If the mountain were easy, it would not mean the same thing to reach the top. Rao wrote this down twice, in two different ways, as if trying to find the phrasing that would hold the idea properly. She talked about free diving, the practice of descending into deep ocean water on a single held breath, going to depths where the water pressure compressed the human body, where the light disappeared and the world went dark and quiet and enormous, and then returning to the surface, not with equipment that made it safe, just with lungs and nerve and a decision to go further than the previous time. The purpose, Rao said carefully, is not to gather information or to achieve a specific practical outcome. The purpose is to go there, Kate said, to be in that place, to know that you went. Rao wrote steadily. He asked, after a while, about the cultural attitude toward failure. What happened when a human attempted something difficult and did not succeed? Kate thought about this. They try again, she said, usually, or they try something slightly different. Failure is treated as information most of the time. It tells you what did not work, which means next time you know to do something else. She paused. There are some people who give up after a failure, of course, but giving up is not respected, culturally speaking. The person who fails and tries again is considered more admirable than the person who never tried. You have a word for it, Rao said. Several, Kate said. Perseverance, resilience, grit. We use all of them as compliments. Rao looked at his notes. He looked at the pages he had filled in this session alone, added to the pages from the last one, added to his observations from Gorath IV and the council chambers. He had been a cultural liaison for 22 years. He had conducted detailed briefings on 14 different species. He had never come close to filling this many pages in 2 sessions. He had one more question. He asked it carefully because he wanted to get it right. When humans encounter a situation that is harder than expected, he said, What is the first thing they do? Kate considered this honestly. Assess, she said. Figure out what exactly is hard about it and why, then decide on an approach, then start. And if the approach does not work, pick another one, Kate said. Keep going. And if there are no good approaches? Kate looked at him for a moment. Then you make one, she said. That is basically the entire history of our species. Rao put his pen down. He looked at his notes. He looked at Kate. Thank you, he said. And he meant it the way you mean it when something has genuinely changed the way you see things. Back in the science division, Vell submitted his formal memo to the full council that afternoon. The memo recommended immediate reclassification of humanity's biological designation. He had checked the council's complete taxonomy system before writing it, searching for any existing category that might fit. He had checked twice. Nothing fit. He created a new category. He called it Extreme Environment Native Uncontrolled Variants. He spent 20 minutes on the formal definition, making sure every word was accurate and precise. At the end of the definition, in the notes field where supplementary specifications were recorded, he added a single line that was not in the formal language of taxonomy documents. Upper variance boundary, undetermined. He filed it, closed his terminal, and sat very still for a few minutes in the quiet office. Then he did what researchers do when they have encountered something that genuinely changes the field. He opened a new document and started writing. New weight. Admiral Dean Harrow was not by nature a man who stood at windows. He was practical in the way that long service produces practicality. He drank his coffee while it was still warm, answered his messages in the order they arrived, kept a desk that had nothing on it that did not belong there. He had commanded 7 ships, overseen 3 planetary survey operations, and sat through enough official council proceedings to know that the most important moments in diplomacy usually felt like paperwork from the inside. He was standing at the window of the human delegation office on Ethon Prime, looking out at the council complex in the early morning light, because he thought better when he could see open space. That was the whole reason. Lena came in with 2 cups of coffee. She set one within his reach and took her own to her chair without asking if he wanted it. She had worked with Dean for 9 years. She knew when he was thinking and when he was ready to talk, and she knew the difference. The morning light on Ethon Prime was pale and slightly blue-edged, very different from Earth's. He had never gotten used to it. He did not mind not getting used to it. Session starts in an hour, Lena said. I know, Dean said. She did not say anything else for a while. She reviewed her notes. He looked out the window. The morning passed around them quietly. 40 years, Dean said eventually. Lena looked up. 40 years in this council as a provisional member, he said. 40 years of being observed and evaluated and assessed against standards designed for species that evolved somewhere easier than we did. He turned from the window. Today they decide what to do about us. Does that concern you? Lena asked. No, Dean said, simply and completely. We are what we are and the vote will reflect it. I am not concerned, I just want to be present for it. They arrived at the council chamber 45 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin. The chamber was empty except for a few administrative staff arranging documents at the delegate positions. Dean and Lena took their seats. Lena organized her briefing materials. Dean sat with his hands folded on the table and looked at the chamber's architecture, the high curved walls, the tiered seating, the central floor where speakers stood when they addressed the full body. 40 years of provisional status. 40 years of being the species everyone was politely uncertain about. By the time the delegations began arriving, Dean and Lena were settled and still, and every delegate who entered and saw them sitting there, calm and ready, seemed to add something to their own expression without meaning to. Oler arrived with the science board. He nodded to Dean. Dean nodded back. Goran entered with the Vrethian delegation and took his seat. He looked like a person who had done a great deal of serious thinking and had arrived somewhere he could stand on firmly. Dean respected that. Council Chair Venra called order. This session convenes for a formal vote on the reclassification of humanity's biological designation and treaty standing, Venra said. The Science Board's recommendation has been distributed and reviewed by all delegations. The floor is open for final statements before the vote proceeds. Delegate Parrott rose first. He stood very straight. He spoke in the precise, structured way that Dean had come to recognize as his natural register, but the content of what he said was different from anything he had said in the previous sessions. Gravari delegation entered this process with formal objections and serious questions, Parrott said. Those questions have been answered completely. The Science Board's findings have been verified independently by our own researchers. The biological examination results are accurate. The Gorath IV survey footage is unaltered. He paused. What the human crew demonstrated at Velkara Station was not an anomaly. It was a representative sample of what this species is capable of as a baseline. We understand that now. He looked at Dean directly. Dean met his gaze and held it. The Gravari delegation will be voting in favor of full member status, Parrott said, without reservation. He sat down. 3 other delegations made statements in similar terms. The Cathali delegate rose and formally introduced a motion to debate whether biological resilience of the documented magnitude constituted a security consideration for other council member species. The motion required a seconding vote to proceed to debate. The chamber was quiet for 5 full seconds. Nobody seconded it. The Cathali delegate sat down without comment. Then Tev rose from the Vrethian bench. He was not on the formal speakers list. He had submitted a written request the previous evening and been granted 2 minutes by the chair. He stood in the open floor space with his notes in one hand, and then he put the notes on the nearest desk because he did not need them. I was on the lander at Gorath IV, he said. I watched for 3 hours through the external cameras while the human team conducted their survey on the surface. I did not go to the surface. 4.1 standard gravity units is beyond my biological tolerance. It is beyond the tolerance of every other species in this chamber. The humans went down, completed their work, and came back with geological data, atmospheric readings, and personal photographs of a landscape they found beautiful. The chamber was completely silent. Something I want to say that is not in the Science Board's report, because the report is a scientific document and what I want to say is not scientific, Tev said. It is personal. During the 3 hours I watched that survey, the human team did not behave as though they were enduring something terrible. They did not behave as though they were surviving. They were working. Gorath IV's surface was simply a location where a job needed doing, and they were the people who were doing it. He paused. I have spent several weeks thinking about what that means, about what it is like to move through the world with that relationship to difficulty. I have thought about it from a biological perspective and from a cultural one, and I keep arriving at the same conclusion. His voice was even and clear. The humans are not unusual because their bodies are strong, though their bodies are strong. They are unusual because of the way they think about hardship. Hardship for them is not an obstacle between them and the work. Hardship is the texture of the work. It is simply what things feel like when you are doing them, and you proceed regardless. He looked at Dean and Lena. I filed my report from Gorath IV, he said. I am glad I was there. I am glad I watched. He sat down. The vote proceeded. Full member status, 17 votes in favor, 0 against, 0 abstentions. Category 1 Resilient Species Designation, the first in recorded council history. 16 in favor, 1 Cathali abstention. Supplementary authorization for human crew to volunteer for high-risk environmental operations across all council jurisdictions. The motion proposed by Goran. Unanimous. Every hand in the chamber rose, including the Cathali. Venra recorded the results. This council formally elevates humanity to full member status. The supplementary designations are adopted. The resolutions carry. No applause. Protocol did not include it. But something moved through the chamber in the moment after the final declaration. A collective easing. The particular quality of air in a room where something that has been long approaching has finally, cleanly arrived. Lena shook Dean's hand. Dean nodded once, deeply and quietly satisfied. He finished the coffee he had been nursing since the session began. It was cold. He did not mind at all. Outside in the corridor afterward, Oler found Dean walking toward the transit point alone. "Admiral," he said. "Doctor," Dean said. He stopped. "I want to ask you something personal," Oler said, "not for any report." "Go ahead," Dean said. "When I examined Dr. Ford, her metrics required me to extend my measurement scales in 11 of 14 categories," Oler said. "She told me she was average for her species by physical standards. Was that accurate?" "More or less," Dean said. "Nina trains consistently. She is in good condition, but she is not exceptional among humans. She is solidly middle of the range." Oler looked at him steadily. "The upper range," he said. "The ones your species would consider exceptional. What are they like?" Dean considered this for a moment. He thought about people he had served alongside over 30 years of command. He thought about a communications officer on his second ship who ran 50 kilometers every weekend without fail, who had once told him that the first 30 were practice and the last 20 were the actual run. He thought about a crew chief who had worked a 40-hour continuous repair shift following a catastrophic systems failure, had eaten a full meal when the immediate crisis was resolved, and had then gone back for another 8 hours because the job was not yet done to his satisfaction. He thought about Cole Ward, lying on his back under a hull panel during a 3.6 G gravity surge, tightening a connector that had been bothering him for a week. "The exceptional ones," Dean said, "are the people that the rest of us look at and ask ourselves, what is the actual difference between them and me? And then decide to find out." Oler looked at him for a long moment. He did not write anything down. He simply nodded slowly, the nod of a person who has received an answer they are going to be thinking about for a very long time. They went their separate ways. Aboard the Ardent, the news arrived mid-morning. Cole was in the cargo bay working through a thruster calibration sequence in the section where the artificial gravity ran slightly uneven, 1.2 standard units on the port side and 0.9 on the starboard. He had noticed this on his first day aboard and had quietly adjusted his work positioning so that he was always on the heavier side, because his body worked better under consistent resistance. The notification came through his wrist panel. He glanced at it. Read the summary. Full membership granted. Category 1 resilient species. First in recorded history. He held the panel still for a few seconds. He read it once more. Then he set his hand back on the calibration tool and kept working. Kate appeared in the cargo bay doorway 9 minutes later. She had her notebook in one hand and was already smiling in the way she smiled when something had genuinely pleased her. "Did you see the news?" she said. "Yeah," Cole said. "Category 1 resilient species." She leaned against the doorframe. "That is a very accurate thing to be called." "It is," Cole said. He tightened a fitting. "Rao messaged me," Kate said. "He said he has been telling everyone in the Thune delegation about the Park Jiangsu story." Cole looked up briefly. "The marathon in the dust storm." "The marathon in the dust storm," Kate confirmed. "He said it became the central example in the informal council briefings on human cultural behavior because it captures everything in one story. The training, the commitment, the refusal to let conditions override the decision already made, and the slightly unreasonable attachment to entry fees." Cole snorted. "What did Lena say about the vote?" "She said we were always this," Kate said. "They just looked." Cole was quiet for a moment. His hands moved through the calibration sequence with the steady, practiced ease of someone who has done this particular job enough times that his hands know the steps and his mind can go elsewhere if it wants to. "She is right," he said. "I know," Kate said. She pushed off from the doorframe and went back to the crew lounge, where her lunch was waiting and her notebook was open to the page she had started filling during the Gorath IV descent. A sentence she had written on the ridge, up in the orange light, when she had paused between photographs to put a thought into words. She had not finished the sentence that day. Owen had called her down to help with the second survey grid, and she had put the notebook away. She read what she had written. She picked up her pen and finished it. "The difference," she wrote, "is not that we do not feel the weight. Every human being feels it. The difference is that we looked at the weight, decided it was ours to carry, and then stopped thinking about it because the work was more important than the discomfort." She read it back. She thought it was approximately right. She closed the notebook. Outside the window, the stars were out in the deep quiet between worlds, exactly where they always were, exactly as far away as they had always been. The Ardent held its course through the dark with the steady, unhurried purpose of a vessel that knows where it is going and is in no particular rush because it will get there regardless. In the Council archive on Ethon Prime, Rao sat at his desk and opened the personal notes file he had been building since the first day he attended a session involving the human delegation. He had filled it considerably since then. He read back through his notes from Kate's cultural briefings, from Gorath IV, from the 2 council sessions, from the quiet conversation in the corridor where Tev had explained his thoughts about humans and difficulty. He organized the material carefully. He was a thorough person. He wanted to get this right. When he finished organizing, he opened a final section at the end of the file and wrote slowly, choosing each word the way you choose words when you intend them to last. Humanity does not adapt to their environment. They absorb it. This is not a poetic way of saying something that could be said more directly. It is the most accurate description available. I have watched them work in conditions that should be impossible for biological creatures, and they did not fight the conditions and they did not ignore the conditions. They incorporated the conditions into the work and kept going. He paused, read it back, continued. They feel the weight. I want to be clear about this, because it would be easy to write a description of this species that makes them sound as though hardship simply does not register for them, and that would be wrong. They feel it. Kate Arden told me that the ridge on Gorath IV made her legs heavy and her breathing difficult. She climbed it anyway, because the light at the top was worth seeing, and she was not going to stand at the bottom and wonder. He paused again. I have been a cultural liaison for 22 years. I have studied 14 sapient species in depth. I have never encountered a species whose fundamental stance toward the world is as consistent as theirs. The stance is this. This is difficult and I am going to do it, not as a boast, not as a performance, as a simple statement of intention that requires no justification. He read the paragraphs through. He added a final one. Take note of them not as a warning but as a wonder. These are the people you want beside you when the universe stops being cooperative, not because they will not feel the difficulty. They will feel it. But they will feel it and they will nod and they will say nothing dramatic and then they will get on with the work. They were always this. They were always going to be this. 40 years of provisional status and 17 votes in a council chamber have not changed one thing about what they are, and nothing else will either. The galaxy finally looked directly at them today. He saved the file. He sat back in his chair. Outside his window, Ethon Prime's pale blue light was moving toward late afternoon, softening toward the warmer tones of evening. Somewhere above, in the orbital lanes, a human ship was docked and the crew was working, because that was what they did and would keep doing, regardless of what any vote said or did not say, regardless of what any council decided or failed to decide. The vote had not made them anything they were not already. It had only given the rest of the galaxy the right vocabulary to describe what had always been true. Dean Harrow stood on the steps of the council complex in the cooling afternoon air and looked up at the sky. Lena was beside him, quiet in the way she was quiet when she was still processing something large. A supply shuttle crossed overhead on its way to the orbital platforms, lights blinking against the pale gray of high altitude. Dean watched it until it was out of sight. The galaxy was, at long last, paying attention. It was, he thought, about time.